Every journey into hidden knowledge reaches a point where questions stop multiplying and understanding begins to settle. What we are about to explore is not something new. It is something that has been quietly present all along, waiting beneath noise, belief, and distraction. The old craft did not survive to be remembered as history. It survived to be recognized as structure, a way the human mind once learned to orient itself in a world without certainty. This is not about rituals, not about symbols, not about secrecy. This is about what remains when explanations fall apart and the mind is left alone with itself. As we step into this final reflection, there is nothing left to uncover, only something left to understand. And that understanding does not come from listening closely, but from listening honestly. This is where the journey ends and where awareness begins. Welcome to Historic Isles. At the end of this journey, something subtle but irreversible has occurred. We are no longer asking what the hidden craft was. We are asking why it survived. Because survival in this case was not accidental. It was intentional, strategic, and deeply aware of the nature of the human mind. The traditions we have followed through silence and shadow were never trying to defeat history. They understood history too well to fight it. Instead, they learned to live underneath it, in places history rarely looks. What endured was not ritual, not belief, not even identity. What endured was a way of seeing, and that is far more difficult to erase. The old craft recognized something that modern systems often ignore, that the human mind is not stable by default. It is shaped, bent, distracted, and fragmented by its environment. Empires knew this. Institutions knew this. But the craft approached this truth differently. Where power sought obedience, the craft sought awareness. Where systems demanded belief, the craft demanded attention. Where authority promised answers, the craft trained perception. Second, this difference defined everything. Human mind gave meaning. They asked, what is actually happening inside us when we fear, desire, or react? Information multiplied. Certainty became currency. And yet, despite all this progress, something essential was quietly lost. Something essential was quietly lost. People learned what to think, but not how to notice. They learned to label emotion, but not to sit with it. They learned to consume meaning, but not to generate it. This was the fracture the craft anticipated. It knew that a future would come where knowledge would be abundant, but understanding would be scarce. So it prepared accordingly. It left behind not instructions, but signals. Signals that activate only when the mind slows down. Signals that bypass ideology. Signals that do not convince, they resonate. That is why this tradition does not feel foreign. It feels familiar in a way that is difficult to explain. Because familiarity does not always come from memory. Sometimes it comes from structure. The hidden craft was built around one radical principle, and Meaning is not transferable. It is experiential. You cannot inherit it. You cannot download it. You cannot be told what it is. You must encounter it. And then, encounters happen at thresholds, moments when certainty collapses. Silence, loneliness, stillness. Modern life tries to eliminate these moments. It fills every gap, distracts every pause, explains away every discomfort. The craft did the opposite. It created spaces where these moments could speak, not to frighten the practitioner, but to reveal the mind's deeper patterns. Patterns that dictate behavior long before logic intervenes. This is why the craft was psychological long before psychology existed. Over time, rituals became misunderstood. Symbols became aesthetic. Silence became awkward. But the internal mechanism never stopped functioning. It simply waited. Waited inside intuition. Inside gut reactions. Inside dreams that linger longer than logic allows. Inside that feeling that something matters, even when you cannot explain why. These are not mystical phenomena. They are remnants of an older cognitive literacy. One that understood how the mind organizes reality beneath language. The craft was never supernatural. It was pre-modern psychology operating without vocabulary. And because it lacked vocabulary, it could not be easily attacked. As we reach the end of this exploration, one realization becomes unavoidable. The hidden craft did not survive despite modernity. It survived because of it. Because modern life intensified fragmentation, accelerated distraction, rewarded surface over depth, and in doing so, it recreated the very conditions the craft was designed to navigate. That is why these ideas feel relevant now, not because they are ancient, but because they address a problem that never left. The problem of a mind overwhelmed by noise, yet starved of meaning. The craft never promised salvation. It never offered escape. It offered orientation, a way to stand still while everything else moves too fast. At its deepest level, the hidden craft taught only three things. First, that fear is information, not an enemy. Fear points to boundaries, to assumptions, to unresolved tension. Suppress it, and it controls you. Observe it, and it teaches you. Second, that symbols speak where language fails, not because they are magical, but because the mind processes them holistically. A symbol compresses meaning. It bypasses argument. It communicates directly with the deeper layers of perception. Third, that silence is not empty. It is diagnostic. In silence, the mind reveals its habits, its loops, its attachments. That is why silence was central, not as a spiritual luxury, but as a tool of awareness. These principles were never meant to be owned. They were meant to be practiced quietly. The tragedy is not that this knowledge was hidden. The tragedy is that modern life convinces people they do not need it. Until they do. Until something breaks. Until certainly fails. Until distraction no longer works. And in that moment, when the mind is forced inward, the old craft becomes visible again, not as history, not as belief, but as recognition. Recognition that some intelligence predates explanation, that some understanding exists beneath culture, that some tools were built not for comfort, but for clarity. So where does this leave us? Not with instructions, not with rules, not with answers. It leaves us with a choice: to continue consuming meaning passively, or to generate it through attention, to treat intuition as noise or as data, to fear silence or to use it. The hidden craft does not demand allegiance. It does not ask to be revived. It asks only one thing: that you notice. Notice what happens when you stop reacting. Notice what emerges when the mind is not fed constant stimulus. Notice what patterns reveal themselves when you allow discomfort to exist without escape. This noticing is the key. Not rituals, not symbols, not secrecy, awareness. And perhaps this is the most unsettling realization of all, that the hidden craft never belonged to the past. It belonged to the structure of the human mind. It survived not because it was protected, but because it was unavoidable. And now, having followed its traces to this point, there is nothing left to uncover, only something left to practice. Because the deepest knowledge does not announce itself. It waits.